morning and welcome to UPN Focus. I'm your host, Milt Thompson. And you know, we've been looking over the several weeks at various institutions, organizations around central Indiana that have some impact on your life. Maybe we're going to look at one that may have an impact on your death. You know, if you're around central Indiana for any period of time, you've probably driven by it 1,000 times. Not paid much more attention to it other than the wonderful bricks and mortar that surround Crown Hill Cemetery. But there's I have a feeling, a lot more going on inside the gates than we would originally imagine. We're going to talk about Crown Hill Cemetery, its various organizations, corporations, and its role in this community with our very special guest. We've got Marianne Randjelovic, who is the director of development at Crown Hill, and development's always an important factor at any organization, and with their president, Keith Norwalk. Keith, welcome to our show.
Thank you.
Crown Hill Cemetery, kind of, you recognize it when you drive by, but you may not know very much about its history other than some of the historical sites. Tell us about Crown Hill Cemetery, how it got started, and where we are today.
Okay. Crown Hill Cemetery was incorporated in 1863. And it was actually a part of a very fascinating movement, a development of cemeteries in rural America in the mid-1850s to 1880s. It is developed along some very romantic tenets of respect for the natural terrain. We have 26 miles of paved road within our 550 acres, and we represent the history and heritage of Indianapolis for the past 137 years.
Is it just a graveyard?
It is a graveyard and much, much more than that.
Tell us about some of the services that you offer to our community.
Well, for obviously many, many generations, we have buried the rich, the poor, every socioeconomic level of the Indianapolis community. We really chronicle the history. Certainly we have the politicians from President Benjamin Harrison, 3 vice presidents, literary notables. Every area of our cultural development, civic, social development is represented at Crown Hill. But what really makes Crown Hill important are the lives, the stories of the over 190,000 people buried there.
This is really a snapshot, an educational snapshot of Indianapolis and its development through all these years.
Absolutely.
Well, that may portend something about how it is organized, what type of structures it is, and how is it managed and run?
A good question. Actually, we have 3 separate corporations. The cemetery was formed through the efforts of 30 civic leaders back in 1863, and those chairs who actually represent the ownership, those buried within the cemetery, have actually transcended through the generations. So we still have what we call the Board of Corporators, which is a board of 30 individuals, of which there are 7 who form the Board of Managers, which actually is the governing board. The cemetery is a not-for-profit cemetery. It's owned by the community. It's for the community. We also have 2 other corporations, the Crown Hill Heritage Foundation, which was formed in 1985, which is a 501c3 public charity. And then our 3rd corporation was formed in 1993, which is a for-profit tax entity, which is the Crown Hill Funeral Home. And we are very excited about the funeral home and the offering of funeral home services, which really brings us around full circle to offering total services for families who are planning for their heritage and as well as for final needs for burial and funerals.
I want to talk a little about some of those services in a moment, but Director of Development at a cemetery, that's kind of ominous. Directors of Development are usually in the business of raising money, and usually by raising money you have to tell some sort of story or sell something. What is it, Marianne, that Crown Hill is trying to sell, and what comprises most of your day?
Well, that's probably probably best expressed in the story of Crown Hill, as Anna Nicholas tells it. And basically what she said back in 1928 was that if all of the people who were buried in Crown Hill could speak, they would tell the story of Indianapolis. And the axiom that to know the story of Crown Hill is to know the story of our founders, our fathers and mothers, our city, our state, and our nation is one that the development there is all about. One of our main roles in development is to do historic preservation of the many buildings and landmarks that are found there. And you can start with the gorgeous Gothic chapel, which was built in 1875 and designed by Diedrich Bohlen, and Mr. Bohlen designed many of the churches that you find throughout the community. You can move from there to the wonderful waiting station, the lovely red brick building where the development office is housed, and the gates, which were built in 1885. And designed by Mr. Schreer, Adolf Schreer, who also designed the State Capitol building. You can move right next to the Century House, which was built in 1904 and designed by Vonnegut and Bone, and you can go on to the brick and wrought iron fence that everyone who drives by to work that day sees, which was designed by George Kessler. And then you can move forward to the service yard of the 1920s and still get a sense in the spirit of where the horses were housed at the time. And when you come through those gates at Crown Hill, you transition into another day, another time, and it's a wonderful way to connect past, present, and future. So the story, Crown Hill is the story about the city, and it's a story about life. And so every day I get to find and meet the people, the names who are on the monuments, the families and founders, and share and build that story with them, and talk about all the good things that went into this cornerstone of American culture.
Well, I was just talking off camera with our producer director here, and he was saying, you know, we go there all the time. It's a beautiful place. We like studying genealogy and those sorts of things in terms of an educational. But you don't really think about, you know, graveyards. You think about a whole lot more in terms of educational context.
Every day people walk into the gates and into the office, and they're people, young people, old people, intergenerational, looking for their grandmother, their grandfather. How do I find my way here? How do I visit? The Genealogical Society of Marianne County is in fact housed in our same building. So it's a wonderful opportunity, and it's a family tradition, in fact, to come out and to visit and to read the epitaphs and to look at the stones and the markers and other great traditions, like it's leaf gathering season. You know, people talk about going to New England to see the leaves. I have never seen a more gorgeous fall than a fall at Crown Hill. Right now, there are just pools of color around each one of the trees where the leaves are falling, and you'll see yellows and golds and reds. And in the fall, you will see family after family and school group after school group come out and do their leaf gathering projects. There are over 150 school tours of 4th, 5th, 6th graders that come through those grounds every year with their teachers, and they go on the Heritage Tour, the Pioneer Tour, the Art and Architecture Tour. It's a phenomenal education facility. It's an outdoor museum. There is statuary and sculpture there that is just astounding. Rudolph Schwartz, who did the War and Peace pieces on the Monument Circle, did some pieces out at Crown Hill of a weeping woman and of a certain busts that you can find in some of the mausoleums. There are architectural and design styles from all ages, so you have art classes coming out.
This is
it's
fascinating.
Phenomenal.
The programs, the aesthetics, the beauty, this all really belies the essence of a place where people are buried.
Yes.
We're going to talk more about its programs, its companies, how it raises its money, how it commits itself to its future right after these important words. Welcome back to UPN Focus. We've been having a fascinating deliberation conversation about the things that go on at Crown Hill Cemetery. And around this time of year, people are always looking at programs and maybe a chance to glimpse and get educated a little bit more about what they see when they drive past 38th Street, bordered all the way up 421 and around the other parts of our city. We were talking about the aesthetics, the beauty, but we're also talking about an operating divisions that try to preserve some of these historic places. How does Crown Hill derive its income, and how does all that work together? You mentioned the three different corporations. Keith, give us a little sense of how all that works together.
Well, we never can lose sight of the wonderful natural resources, the history, but we are a business, and we have been a business for 137 years, and our greatest charge today is growing the business to provide the assurance for the thousands of families who have their heritage at Crown Hill that it will be maintained into the future. So we do have very active burial activity. We are the largest cemetery in the city in terms of activity, with over 1,400 burials annually. Our funeral home is growing very quickly and is certainly rising to the occasion of serving the community. The profits from the funeral home ultimately will fuel the care fund, which provides for the future maintenance of the cemetery. So we are a very active business and continue to serve the community today as we have in the past.
People might not think of the cemetery, as well as now funeral home business, as one that is business, and secondly, one that's perhaps even competitive in business relative to the market share out there. They say, well, people are always dying, so there's always perpetual amounts of business, but that draws people to business when there is that kind of market. What kind of distinctive features do you believe that we have at Crown Hill that would set it apart from perhaps some of those other would-be competitors?
We are definitely set apart, and I think that in that lies our strength as a cemetery and funeral home. We are independently owned, as I've mentioned, by the community. There's a great deal of acquisition and consolidation within the industry today. Families coming to Crown Hill know that they will be served by Crown Hill both today and in the future. The uniqueness of our property certainly sets us apart. Rarely today do you have traditional cemeteries with the myriad of different burial options available. We're very blessed to have the venue, the location that we have, and the convenience. Having the funeral home on the property of the cemetery is very convenient, and often we don't think of the need for a funeral home to be convenient. And yet at the difficult time for a family in planning a funeral, and certainly for families who have not planned in advance, it's the most difficult time for a family. And so if we can provide personalized, convenient service for that family, we've come a long way in serving that family's needs.
Well, traditional funeral services may not fit with some of the current trends. If we kind of look at West Coast and East Coast, differing ways of memorializing lives or celebrating lives are experienced. Different cultures, as we become a more diverse community, have varying cultural mores as well as responsibility to funeral or memorial services. What kind of adjustments are being made to those kind of current trends, and how well equipped, in your opinion, is Crown Hill to meet those changing needs?
Very dramatic changes are taking place. Probably the greatest distinction that we have today in terms of a major shift has been toward cremation. And cremation is growing very rapidly. The Crown Hill is able to serve the community, families wanting cremation. We were actually the first historic cemetery in the country to develop a memorial cremation garden, which is in a beautiful wooded area. We actually offer the scattering of cremated remains, which some might think, well, that's contrary to the tenets of a cemetery burying. And yet we feel we're providing service. It's an option, it's an alternative that we need to provide. In terms of multiculturally, we are all seeing a tremendous influx of different cultures into our community, and it's a very exciting challenge for us to learn the traditions of the cultures that we serve and to serve their needs. It is by serving personal cultural needs that we will continue to be relevant in the future.
The various memorials I've been read and trying to keep kind of abreast what goes on there. There are sections that are set aside for various organizations. How would one start that process to determine if there is an appropriate way to recognize a particular segment of our community?
It would merely be a matter of making that desire known to us. We've worked creatively with many different groups. Probably the most interesting cultural adaptation we have made has been for the Muslim community. And we actually resurveyed a section of the cemetery so that the orientation of the graves was in accord with their tradition. So we have sections dedicated to fraternal organizations, firefighters. We've recently opened a firefighter section, church groups, as well as ethnic and religious groups. We have a very significant project that is being dedicated this Sunday, which is the Indiana AIDS Memorial, which commemorates and recognizes those lost to the AIDS epidemic.
You've had some news in recent times, and around Halloween time, there are those who might have in their minds that this is a place to frequent, as well as visit, as well as what other things that kind of occur there. But vandalism, some theft. Tell us about that kind of problem as it pervades this kind of business, and then what kind of steps are you taking, if any, to be sure that those kind of memorable things are preserved?
Theft and vandalism is a problem, tragically, that impacts many cemeteries across the country. Crown Hill has been very, very fortunate that we've had very, very few incidents in our history. I think part of the reason is that we do have full-time security. We are completely fenced. I also see a great deal of respect for Crown Hill and the institution that it is. We had an incident this past spring that was very interesting. It was actually the theft of a number of historical cemetery urns. We were very aggressive and proactive in making the public aware of the problem, not to alarm anyone, but more to alert individuals that this occurred, and to be vigilant in helping us solve the problem.
As anyone would, as you're protecting the interest of a business,
Exactly.
as well as preserving heritage and very, very special places that mean a great deal to people who utilize those
Yes.
particular services. We've talked about the cemetery, its massive size, sometimes in future development capacity, I expect, for lots of years. We've also talked briefly about the funeral home and its having a place that's convenient relative to those services. I do want to take a moment and talk about the Heritage Foundation as the other side of that, and I want to do that right after we have these very, very important messages. And welcome back to UPN Focus. We've been talking here in the Halloween season about going out to Crown Hill Cemetery, but we're going out there in the way of talking about it as a business. We've talked about its cemetery with Keith Norwalk, as well as their funeral home. Marianne, their development director, Randjelovic. The Heritage Foundation, we've heard something about it resonating around some of the activities, educational and historical things. Tell us about the foundation, what its role and goals are, and how it goes about promoting the entire enterprise.
One of the major educational programs at Crown Hill is celebrated every year on September 22nd, which is the date of the signing of the Emancipation Proclamation. And on that date this year, we had 1,000 fifth grade students from the Indianapolis public schools come out on the grounds. And we had reenactors there. There was Harriet Tubman and Sojourner Truth and Major Delaney. And we had cannons and we had muskets. And the students had the opportunity to see in person what they were learning from history books in school and interact with the reenactors. And also then listen to the lay male chorus, a group of 77 and 80 88-year-old men singing patriotic songs, and the interaction between the students and the gentleman was just fantastic to see. And that type of education, which is brought right home and makes education and contribution to the community come alive, is a fantastic event. We also do what's called Little Orphan Annie's Picnic with Riley at sunset the last Saturday in August. And we have children who go to the library and research the poetry of Mr. Riley, and then that day come dressed in period costume and recite what they have learned, their poems, amongst the crowd. We also introduce the families to ragtime music and jazz music, and do walking tours and trolley tours, and give the children toys from the area like harmonicas. And then you can see the families wandering up and down the hills and among the monuments, and it's just a wonderful way again to introduce people to not only Crown Hill, but that story again of death and dying and living in a way that gives testimony to the strength of the human spirit.
So the services go well beyond just having funeral services. It goes into an entire line of business, if you will, that attracts us based on history and education. In the context of the foundation's purposes, how can people support it?
People can support the foundation and its purposes through our annual appeal, which is currently going on. People can support individual programs, such as an artist in residence program that we've just started. People can contribute to the endowment and can certainly contribute directly to any of the buildings in terms of historical preservation, if that's where their interest lies. And I would encourage and invite anyone to come out if what they like to be involved in is statuary or buildings or education or cultural heritage. There are ways to fund and support and be involved in all of those efforts.
So we are learning that our initial impressions of that big graveyard out there is significantly much more in terms of service to our community, opportunities for participation, involvement directly related, as well as having the traditional services at a convenient location, as well as, and I'm sure, an affordable price. Well, the opportunities that avail themselves at Crown Hill Cemetery are numerous, as are other activities in our community. Take advantage of those by looking at our calendar this week.
Here are some events in our area for you to focus on.
And please take advantage of those wonderful opportunities, not only in our calendar, but at Crown Hill Cemetery, Funeral Home, Heritage Foundation. We've been with Marianne Randjelovic, who is their Director of Development, as well as with Keith Norwalk. And you come back here this time next week, where you've got Milt on UPN Focus. We'll see you next week.